Hey guys, Alex and Dad from 7th Hour Films back again with Doctor Who Classic. Last time on Doctor Who Classic, we finished up The Abominable Snowman. What happened on that one?
Well, we find out that I can't remember if it was the abbot or the leader of the monastery, had literally been kept alive for like 300 years by what we assumed all along, the Great Intelligence. And they're trying to, I don't know, I can't remember exactly the details of how he was trying to bring his consciousness into a corporeal being. I don't know. It was kind of weird. They send the monks away. The monks come back. There was a big battle, and they lose.
Yeah.
Jamie smashed up the console, causing the Great Intelligence to, I don't know, disappear.
Right. So the whole thing was that the Great Intelligence was trying to create its own body, because otherwise it was just some intelligence out in space. And for some reason that involved the monks and the Yetis and Padmasambhava and I don't know. And there was like a giant goo mountain.
Yeah, the goo mountain. That was the kind of the weird thing in there, because we really never did understand what that was about.
Yeah, like I think that was supposed to be his body being formed, but it was very strange, so we're not sure.
A mountain of goo.
Yeah. This week, we're on to the Ice Warriors.
Ooh.
I had to buy a DVD of this one, so yeah, we have this. We'll just put that there because there's no other room on the table.
Why did we have a DVD? Is this not one on?
Well, okay. I was told that there were computerized voices in this episode that are next to impossible to understand. Like they're a lot worse than the Cybermen. So I was looking around for ways to watch it with subtitles, and come to realize that pretty much everywhere doesn't have this episode in particular. So I bought the DVD of it. It is a technically complete episode. Episodes 2 and 3 are animated, but it is all there technically. So yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Commentary and beneath the ice, behind the scenes of the animated episodes. So we might look at that off air.
Yeah, maybe. So, yeah, I just thought I would show that I went out of my way to get this story on DVD. So we'll just sort of set that there, and that's kind of that. We don't really have anything else to lead into this one, other than we have seen the Ice Warriors before in that one Third Doctor episode.
Yes.
The Curse of Peladon. So we do at least know of them, the Ice Warriors of Mars, which have no relation to the Waters of Mars episode that we had. That was just some other thing on Mars. So, yeah.
Again, continuity? What continuity?
Nah. Even in the modern age, they don't really think about it. So, I guess that's basically it. So we should go ahead and get into this episode.
I did want to mention, I think we had said something in the last a couple of times that we had a huge, almost 2 weeks of below freezing weather here. We broke that. It was like a Friday or Saturday when it finally got to about 34 degrees. By Monday, it was in the 60s, and it has continued to be in the 60s since then. So, yeah. Great Plains, southern Great Plains, we go from sub-freezing temperatures to temperatures in the 60s within the span of 48 hours.
Yeah, which is actually... now, we didn't actually have any blackouts here, but there was the possibility of the rolling blackouts. So, because of that, I sort of had to stop a few videos from last week. So... just a couple episodes took a break last week, but you guys will have already seen that. So,
all right.
Yeah.
So we're all good.
Yeah.
Also, now it's tornado season.
Yeah. And all of the snow that was outside was so bright at night, which is why you can see there's something in my window. I put it's actually a Doctor Who poster that I put in my window to try to block some of that light. So I could probably get it out now, but I've just sort of left it there. Anywho. Let's move on into this episode. Ooh, there's some big titles right there.
Wonder if that's from the DVD or if that's what they actually showed. Now, Brian Hales, didn't he co-write something?
Yeah, the name is familiar. Oh no, I turned on Star Trek by accident.
Slowing down.
Interesting mask.
Yeah.
I doubt it.
Well, I was gonna say it's good that she's wearing a mask at all, but that actually is not covering her mouth.
Emergency.
Of course. Apparently was the expert.
I'm not an expert.
State
Crazy ideas. Where's Arden?
Sounds like
The
a
ice base can be the
politician.
instrumentation project.
There's not much base can do about it, sir. After all, we can't even ask permission, can we? Come on, Davies, hurry, man.
It would be hilarious if the TARDIS materialized within a glacier and they had to dig it out. The singer's definitely going nuts this episode.
I was going to say, that's a little intrusive.
Nah. Whoops!
Why is it opening outward? Doesn't open outward, does it?
Well, it's supposed to. He just never does.
It's a blind landing. So what do you call it?
Another happy landing.
Hey, look at the snow.
Oh, no, not again. Tibet was bad enough, but I think you put us down just farther up the mountain. Well, we can see, shall we?
I mean, I was gonna say, this is our third straight episode of cold and snow.
Find it up.
You think they're gonna get to a point where they wave their hand and it doesn't look awkward?
It was all bluff, wasn't it? That 2 minutes, 38 seconds of danger.
Oh no, it's near enough correct. Give or take a second.
Rubbish.
Check it on your precious computer then.
Miss Garrett, do so.
This is an interesting thing where the Doctor proves he's smarter than most computers.
Proper ice warrior, is he, sir? I reckon the event will be interesting. Yes.
Thus we have a
A
title.
mighty computer maker with eh? Sir, hadn't we better get back while the
These
weather's
workers
still
remind me of the guys in Monty
Python.
Python.
Davies, try and bring...
You'll be evacuated with the other scavengers in due course.
Oh, where to?
The African Rehabilitation Centres, of course. Oh no, not Africa.
Very well, fire away.
I present you a problem.
Oh geez, Victoria with that entire continent bias, apparently.
Well, the carbon dioxide level in the Earth's atmosphere helps to retain the sun's heat. Take that gas away, and there's a sudden freeze up.
Global freezing. Exactly the opposite of what we have now.
Well, civilization is, thanks.
No. You don't see yourself dressed like that, then?
Jamie,
Oh, I'm sorry. It was just an idea.
we will now change the subject, please. I want to look at this map.
Oh no, it's a Lego Ice Warrior. Okay. That is part 1.
Very quick.
Yeah.
Very well held together.
Yeah, definitely. Which, this is a 6-parter, so makes me feel like maybe we're going to get something out of all 6 parts, too.
That would be nice. But I swear that the writer is somebody who co-wrote something before that we didn't really care for.
Yeah, the name sounds familiar, but I don't remember where.
Interesting. Again, this is literally the opposite of what is happening now. Instead of losing the carbon dioxide, we have trapped too much carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gases. And that's why, I realize that the words global warming are not fashionable anymore, but it is affecting climate change. One of the reasons why we had this incredibly bad, 2 weeks of sub-freezing temperatures here is because this gigantic heat wave over the North Pole had just pushed all of that Arctic air down across Canada and the United States. So, I mean, this is, again, quite interesting to see the reverse of that in this. But it also led me to something that I was talking to my students about just the other week, is that if climate change does begin affecting the southern hemisphere, what if the ice in Antarctica really does begin to melt? Because, there is land under there. There's not land under the North Pole, but there is under the South Pole. What if we discover that there were civilizations under that ice? So that's basically what they're saying here is, what if somebody had come down before the time that we know as prehistory, not just the Vikings, but going back to literally Ice Age times where there would have been nomads and hunters and gatherers instead of anybody else. So, again, an interesting premise.
Yeah. It's also very interesting that this is, again, our third straight serial of ice and cold. Because we had that with the tomb, we had that in Tibet, and now we have it here. So I'm just curious, maybe they're just going to keep going with that, maybe? Well, like, the rest of this is just the frozen season? like, I don't know, I just thought that'd be kind of interesting.
Well, I'm sure that they are simply recycling a lot of sets and effects and things like that, so that would save some money.
Yeah, it's like, all right, can you put this in snow? We have snow right now, so.
But I've noticed all the computers and all the other electronics and things like that are completely different from what we saw in the Tomb of the Cybermen, because Cybermen looks like stuff that you would have seen in the late 50s and early 60s, whereas this is beginning to look more like the Star Trek and late 60s and early 70s stuff that we began seeing in the movies.
Yeah. Also, I was thinking, how is it that the TARDIS landed like that? And then I realized, when he said, it was a blind landing, it's like, clearly the Doctor was trying to actually pilot the TARDIS, she got pissy and landed on her side. So, that's clearly what happened there. So, it is also good that we do have the subs, because whenever that computer talks, it's like, okay, I think I might have been able to get some of that, but not a lot of that, so... It's just a little too much.
Yeah, the late 60s idea of what computer-generated voices sounded like is not... I mean, we all know by the mid-70s we were starting to get, the computer-generated voice.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound anything like that. It's very flat and very monotone. Actually sounds... English sounds somewhat Germanic. But, yeah, it would be very easily recognizable.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting because it's like... they keep making these like computerized voices, like with the Cybermen or now with just these computers, but they kind of mastered it already in the Daleks. Like the Daleks, like, okay, yeah, that's a sort of robotic voice, but you can understand them perfectly. Yeah. And like, I don't know like what the difference is on that one. And maybe it is because like sort of the Dalek inflections are a bit different. They're more. I mean, they kind of yell everything on top of that. But maybe that's it. That it's the volume of their voice that's breaking through some of that so that you can hear it. But I have no idea. So good job, Jamie.
She couldn't run away?
Guess not.
How was I brought to life?
Let the scientists here on Earth help you.
They would not help me. They would keep me as a curiosity.
Good point.
And they would leave my warriors for dead.
Decide what?
Whether to go back to our own world or to conquer this.
All relevant factors now presented.
Somewhat of a lizard, reptile.
Well, there are advantages to living in a plant museum, even this close to the glacier.
Oh, so even a scientist can appreciate it then.
Well, there's warmth and food. Selected ancient food plants. Tomatoes, carrots, potatoes, strawberries.
Why tomato but potato?
Aye.
Shouldn't it be tomato and potato?
One would think.
What is that?
Sonic gun. It will burst your brain with noise.
That's our first sonic device.
The trouble with Clint is that he's not a proper scientist. He's an organizer. He should have been born a robot.
But you'd think a robot would be better at science.
This guy must have been huge.
Oh, yeah.
No, it's not in there. Further down the corridor.
Well, they probably just reused whoever played the Cybermen a couple episodes ago.
Well, I'll try and help you. But I do think you might try trusting human beings instead of computers.
I trust no one, Doctor. Anymore. Human emotions are unreliable.
You would have made a good Dalek.
Nah.
I just got to see that the...
Looks like the newest Xbox.
of the mission you have yet to accomplish.
Oh, no, Clem, not at night. Not for you or anybody. You've never been out there at night.
There's abominable snowmen.
No. There's gonna be a giant dude that's dressed like a polar bear, just like Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. Ironically, there are Martians here.
And now, to bring them back to life.
It's interesting they put his full title in the credits too.
Now, before I forget, again, the whole tomato-potato thing was a little weird. And I'll have to say, again, I lived in England for 3 years, and I heard a different pronunciation of the word glacier. Now, we pronounce it like Glaysher, glacier. When I was there, the few times I heard it, it was like glacier. But they're saying glacier, and I've never heard it pronounced that way.
Yeah, that is strange. You could honestly, when you first say that, there's a part of me that's like, oh, well, times change, and then I have to stop and be like, no, wait a minute, you were there.
I was
around this time, so how does that...
Yeah.
That's, I don't know, maybe it can't be a dialect thing, you would think.
No, because they're all saying it.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not sure. It's so...
But what really throws me off is the tomato-potato thing. Because, I mean, there's even songs about you say potato, I say potato, you say tomato, I say tomato. Let's call the whole thing off. I mean, and again, that's a kind of a joking song. But still, why would you say tomato and potato? That makes no sense to me.
Yeah. English is already a weird language to begin with. And we've only made it worse over the years. So... And just going from the English they speak in England, which apparently we can't get a consensus on anyway, then you come over to the States, and we have all sorts of dialects and different words and stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. That is... I wouldn't have thought of that. It's tomato, but they still say potato. And it's like, well, that's the same word.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Not really sure about that.
But again, the script is holding together very well.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be any padding. I'm hoping that in 6 episodes they don't try to pad it out in episodes, 4 and 5.
Yeah.
Like they normally do. So,
and it's interesting because, we have this whole plot, but the Ice Warriors seem to just be that's also happening. Like, normally you get this whole thing like, oh, well, here's the villains and they have this grand plan. Even the Cybermen, when they're awoken from their tombs, it's like, well, they're awoken and now they're going to, finish what they were already doing. Whereas this time it's like, okay, yeah, we do have the whole thing of, well, the Ice Warriors have to figure out, are they going to return to Mars or are they going to conquer Earth? But still, right now they're really just not doing anything. Like, or at the very least, they're still working to... It's just like a coincidence that they're being unfrozen.
Well, yeah, and again, I'm hoping we'll see this in an upcoming episode. What were they coming here for in the first place? Did they plan to colonize the Ice Age world? Because it would, of course, been easier then, because the whatever Ice Age residents there would have been stone spears and stone knives, and I don't even know that they would have had a bow and arrow yet. So it would have been very easy to do that. But he didn't seem to make any reference to that. They landed, they crash landed, and they got buried in an avalanche, and they've been frozen for at least 6,000 or 7,000 years, if not much longer.
Yeah.
And again, he says we have to decide whether we're going to go back to Mars or try to conquer the Earth. So I guess the idea about are we going to try to conquer it is knowing that the Earth now has advanced technology. It would be much harder for us to conquer, even though we do have the sonic weapon there. Yeah. So again, they didn't explain that, but hopefully in one of the upcoming episodes we'll find out if that was in fact their intent.
Yeah, and it is also interesting. I think they said something about like they were investigating something on Earth, but I did find it interesting that it's like Yes, so we landed, and we were immediately buried in snow for 7,000 years. Like, oh, well, that's just unfortunate, you know? Like, it I don't know, like, the way he said it just made it sound like as soon as he walked out of his ship, buried. It's like, oh, man. But, like you said, if it's a crash landing, well, that makes sense. You crash a spaceship, and then that avalanche comes in and buries it. So, yeah. Alrighty.
Now, I also have to say, I don't like what they're doing with Victoria. All right, she's gone back to the Susan, young girl, damsel in distress thing, and does not appear to be at all like Polly or Barbara or anything like that. And it's, considering how far they advanced going up to Polly, this seems to be a step back for this character.
Yeah, I mean, I would still like what they did in Tomb of the Cybermen, where Victoria was trigger happy. Yeah. I just think that's funny, but that even would still be something, you know. It's at least proactive, even if, you know, you maybe don't shoot people, Victoria, but still, like, yeah, she is sort of more of the damsel in this one.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, maybe there'll be a bit more with it. We still have a few episodes.
I have to say, the animation doesn't bother me, but it's not as good as some of the ones we've seen.
Yeah.
Now, are there any episodes that are just completely lost, where they don't have any audio or anything either?
No, I don't think so. I think there's at least something for everything.
And they haven't really established where this base is, have they?
No, I don't think so. Because they've talked about, like, glaciers all over the world, so...
And they're in the mountains, so this is... I don't think this would be in Great Britain. You know, don't think they have mountains like that even up in Scotland.
Yeah.
So perhaps it's somewhere in Europe, but...
I don't think he quite realizes how dangerous this creature is. What's happened here? He must be blind. Well, he's a
These suits are very
scientist and
interesting.
trying to have his head in the air.
Which, I mean, I guess it's futuristic
I
and stuff.
certainly do.
When they showed it earlier, it looked like Jamie was wearing shorts, but then I realized, no, that's the plastic pants just sort of covering up his kilt.
Yes, of course. But this is a formal establishment, and our regulations
Your
are numerous.
regulations do not apply to me. I work in my own way, freely.
Interesting that he's got a 5 o'clock shadow in the
Regulations seem to bother him, too.
animation that he doesn't seem to
Probably
have
causes his
in
eventual
the
breakdown
regular
effect.
episodes.
Breakdown? I thought you said he defected.
Did I?
They did say he was
Well,
scruffy
one
looking.
thing led to another. Naturally, he was under a great deal of pressure.
Scruffy looking nerf herder.
Just too much for him.
And if you smirk again like that, I'll crack your head open with this.
You're definitely back to your normal witty self.
So he's not a defector. The
Someone's outside.
No, I think he's just
They must have tracked
A
a
you
local?
guy.
down the bay.
Yeah.
Hide yourself. We don't want you carted off to Africa yet.
Maybe he is some sort of, like, rebel or rogue, but
You?
he's just staying away from Africa.
You'll find Clint one of these days in a museum, like that ancient stone, with an inscription round him. Robotized human, Mark II, now extinct. But you'll find others like me, still alive.
There's a very strange anti-computer message in this one.
Yeah.
Change things.
Don't you understand, Jane? Clint's just a talker. He's a glib political animal. Even if I did change things, the Clint's of this world will still come out on top, running things according to their own whims and indulgences.
Wow.
And the pity of it
What a
is,
timely
they believe they
topic. Science versus politics.
You will come. Now.
Oh no, she has a flash drive.
You must be.
Well, how is it that he survived?
Now, how did she get away?
Well,
Please answer me.
Oh, if they let her go.
well.
Oh, Jeffrey, it's horrible.
Keep calm, girl. We want facts. Now tell us about the spacecraft first.
Please, please listen to me. I understand.
Oh no, they're comedically big gun.
Don't you understand?
Alright. That's that's the first 3 parts.
Well, again, that's probably the most well-crafted story that we've seen in a long time. I mean, literally not a second that is wasted. You've got the 2 or 3 different storylines going on, including the woman working at the base who is still friends with Penley.
Yeah.
So, it's just, it's very well written. I still think, though, that something else that what is it, Brian Hale, that we said?
Yeah.
Brian Hale's, that he wrote, that we just absolutely thought he and his collaborator didn't have any idea what they were doing. But this is very good, so.
Yeah. I mean, it is one of those things where it's like, even if you have a writer and they didn't do a good episode, even still, like, you can't really judge them just off of that one. So,
yeah.
I mean, Terry Nation also wrote half of the Daleks' master plan. So, anyway, and I specifically mentioned Daleks' master plan that time. I thought we would maybe. Of course, I've ruined it now. So, anyway, but yeah, definitely an interesting one. Again, I like that the Ice Warriors are really kind of there. It's actually really interesting that there's only a slight focus on them. It's like, okay, they're doing their stuff. The Doctor is obviously thinking about what's going on there. And, Jamie and them are worried about Victoria. But the rest of the group really is not concerned with the Ice Warriors. They're just sort of like, well, that's the second thing we have to do. We still have to work on... Like, the only thing they're worried about is the reactor in their ship, because that could explode with the ionizer. So it's an interesting sort of dynamic, So let's see if we hop into the notes on this one. The first thing I wrote down is glaciers, as they call it in this one. It's interesting how they haven't said what year this is.
Yeah.
So obviously, it must be higher into the future. This does sort of work off of the Moonbase episode, where it's like, oh, well, we have the Moonbase, which can control the hurricanes that are showing up on Earth and stuff, so, we keep a handle on the weather. So clearly this must be afterwards. I don't think it would be before, like...
And is this before or after the Dalek invasion of Earth?
Yeah, that's true. Again, and people have said, like, keeping continuity at this point is really not a thing they were doing. But it is just one of those things where it's like, I wonder how could someone do that. It's like one of my favorite video game series is The Legend of Zelda, and they have so many games, but they're pretty much all their own stories. But then everyone tried to put them into one timeline of like, yes, this is how it all fits. And then Nintendo put them all in a timeline. But when you really stop and think about it, it really doesn't work. It's like there's vague references to other games, but they're really just sort of standalone.
I just had a thought that, we can kind of rationalize this if we use the Dr. Emmett Brown theory that whatever they did in the Moonbase altered the history that was supposed to happen, so that the Dalek invasion of Earth could have happened either before or after the Moonbase, because it's an alternate timeline. That we don't have to follow the same timeline, that they're literally jumping into a different time dimension each time. So all of these things were happening on multiple timelines or variations of timelines on multiple Earths.
Yeah. Or just, the fact that the Doctor's interference with some of these things can sort of change what has already happened. The only consistent thing, ironically, is the Doctor going through all of it. Yeah. Which they'll have, like... Because time is such a strange concept on this show. Like, they'll say later on, it's like, time, everyone thinks of time as, a line. But it doesn't work like that, really. And so... And of course, them saying that is more of a, you really shouldn't think about it too hard. But, like, they'll have something where it's like, okay, there's, like, Cybermen in the 1800s or something. And it's like, well, wait, did this always happen or did it not? And it's like, well, generally it's like, well, when this stuff happens, it's happening for the first time in history. So technically, history played out, but then something new is happening in history, and that's when the Doctor, like, goes and finds it, basically.
Oh.
The TARDIS takes him back there. which is a strange sort of concept. But then there'll be other times where they say, they'll be like, oh well, you know, how am I trying to phrase this? This is very complicated. You can tell I'm buying time with all of my stuttering. It's a very complicated thing to try to explain, but like there'll be a past doctor and they reference something, and unbeknownst to them, they're referencing something that they will do in the future, and it's like, so for them, for that doctor, are they from that time where the doctor has gone through and done everything, or is it that that doctor is going through and doing that stuff, but then how does that... It's just this whole sort of thing, so yeah.
What do they call it? Great big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey
It's a great
stuff.
big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. So, it's best not to think about it. Though it is interesting that there is technically no year on this one. So, because, yeah, you know, others like the moon base, it's like, okay, well, they said that was 2070. And then Dalek Invasion of Earth was like 2064, I think, somewhere around there. But then you have something like The Power of the Daleks, where it's like, okay, they don't say in the episodes, but then it's like, oh, well, in the trailers it said in the year 2020. It's like, well, that was very presumptuous of you, you know, like sort of Back to the Future, like, well, this is going to be 2015. Is it going to be 2015? I don't think it was.
Where's our hoverboards?
Yeah, so I want to have something more dangerous than a skateboard. Why don't I have that yet? So, but anyway, just some sort of anomalous future time where we are in another ice age. Which again, that is an interesting concept. You know, normally it's like, oh, okay, you know, here's just a bit of a more advanced version of the Earth. It's like, no, this one, the Earth is going through something right now. So I do kind of like that. Let's see. Again, we had the TARDIS landing on its side. Honestly, I should lay the TARDIS down properly. Of course, then you can start seeing all the screws and stuff. We'll just lay her right there. That works. That was, again, very interesting, but I do like how the Doctor says that it's like, oh, well, it was a blind landing. It's like, well, normally the TARDIS sort of takes care of that because the TARDIS decides where they go and stuff. So I just imagine it is like when they went to the moon base and it's like, oh, yes, well, I'll take you all to Mars. And then the TARDIS got all mad that he was actually trying to drive, so she took him to the moon base instead. I just assume that's what happened, is that he can't properly land it.
Now, have you ever played the sound effects for the audience?
I did on a modern episode once, so if you turn on and then just... That's probably nice and loud next to the microphone. It's a lot longer than the actual, like, sound. Like, normally it's just goes for maybe 10 seconds, but this one's really long. And then that light's just going to blink for a little while. So, we'll just enjoy that. Okay. Anyway. But yeah. Specifically, the 13th Doctor's TARDIS, too. Which I think the one we currently have here with the second Doctor is pretty similar. Like, the sign and stuff is black on that one, too. So, should be close enough to accurate. Let's see. Okay, so we had a whole thing about computers in this one, which I thought was interesting. This sort of strange, almost anti-computer sort of thing, which some of it, like, okay, you know, it makes sense, like, oh, well, we don't want to just rely on the computers for everything, you know, we should have actual smart people in here, and that's fine. And so I kind of get that with Penley, and how he would obviously be driven away by Clint's obsession with using the computer and stuff. I also found it interesting that the Doctor kind of had that too. You know, like, he'll say, like, oh, well, I deal with computers when I need to and stuff. And it's like, but he would get very angry, which I guess, you know, part of it is, well, he doesn't like that they're having to check his work. He thinks, well, I know who I am. I'm smart enough. You can trust me, but they obviously want to double check it. So I can understand him getting mad about that. There is a part of me that also thinks, like, like part of the reason he's sort of offended by going to the computers and stuff is because the main computer that he always has to deal with is the TARDIS, and she's very temperamental. It's like they'll say later on, it's like, so how do you fly the TARDIS? Poorly, generally. Generally how you fly the TARDIS is you negotiate, not successfully most of the time. So so I would imagine, especially after the landing they had this episode and stuff with like the moon base, that could be why the Doctor is not very fond of computers per se.
Yeah.
So, but I just thought that was a whole interesting thing.
Yeah. Again, this is very early on. Like say, if this is still like 68 going into 69, maybe.
Yeah.
This whole thing of science versus politics, that's really kind of foreshadowing, as foreshadow as we used to say, because that really didn't become a thing until much later.
Yeah, which it kind of reminds me of Planet of Giants, where they had the insecticide, and it's like, oh, should we really have this, or stuff? It's like, well, it could work, but it could also have some really bad ramifications, and then there were those two opposing forces in that episode. Yeah. So yeah, it is interesting, the politics versus the science, which, I mean, Clint is a very fascinating character because it's like, okay, he's not really a scientist. He always relies on the computers, but he's more of, he was chosen because he hasn't failed. So presumably that's part of the reason why Penley left, not just the arrogance, but also, well, I mean, yeah, the arrogance of, I haven't failed, so I won't fail. But then when problems start arising, that sort of chips away at, I guess his ego.
There's also that thing he said, he made some reference to, that losses were part of the equation, that we're going to lose lives. So, I mean, this is a guy who, again, he's so results-oriented that to him, this is, again, a very political kind of thing back in the 60s, when, for example, the United States, our involvement in Vietnam was, sure, we're going to lose, anywhere to maybe 10,000 men each year, but we will have contained communism. I mean, that was the idea, was that we have to figure out what are acceptable losses to prevent the spread of communism. And when the public found out about that, it was like, no, there's no acceptable number of losses. If our ideology, if our ideas of democracy and freedom cannot contain communism, is it worth the loss of that many young lives? And it's a horrible kind of political and scientific and humanistic math there. If one life is lost, that's one life too many.
Right. Which obviously, like you said, Clint doesn't really see it that way. It's like, he is so oriented on the results, which obviously is what drove Penley away.
And one idea there, this is something, again, that we may see in the next 3 episodes. If they stop the advance of the glaciers, are they going to bring back the plants, or are they going to continue having a huge amount of population with no food? I mean, yes, they've moved to artificial food, but still, I don't think they're taking into account the fact that if they do stop the glaciers, what do they do then? You win the war, but then how do you win the peace that comes afterwards?
Yeah, I guess sort of a reconstruction sort of thing. Like, what do you do after? Because, that was the whole thing, was the reason all these, glaciers are here was because, there's not a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere now, so there's not a lot of heat. Everything can sort of expand. But then they realize, well, if we do that, that's going to, destroy, so many buildings and history and stuff like that. They said, 5,000 years of history gone in an instant. And it's like, well, okay, but do you have a solution for why they were moving in the first place? Do you move back? Do you have some sort of artificial way of putting, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, maybe?
Is that what the ionizer is supposed to do, is to put more carbon dioxide to rebalance it? But even so, you're again still relying on a machine rather than letting nature go back to the way it had been doing for 4.5 billion years or however long.
So it's a bit tricky. What do you do? You haven't addressed that yet. So
you're treating the symptoms but not the cause.
Which kind of reminds me, I just watched an episode of Doctor Who where it was basically like Amazon in space, and it was like, okay, so there was this whole, ironically, a whole thing about automation and computers and stuff. But I feel like in that episode they didn't address like the workplace conditions, and they had a whole thing of like the villain being like, oh, we can't have all this automation. People need jobs. And they did actually at the end. They were like, oh, well, while his methods were wrong, he was right, and so the company is now going to have a lot more real organic workers. And I thought, okay, that's great. I feel like you've addressed half the problem, because now, a few years from now, all of those organic workers you put in are now going to be, rising up against the workplace conditions, which I don't think you addressed in this. So, yeah, it is one of those things where it's like, why? You're not seeing the whole picture here. Yeah. So, yeah. Which maybe even Penley's thinking about that. It's like, okay, well, yeah, we're doing all this to get the results we want, but what do we do after that? And he, the scientist, is probably thinking that. So, let's see. I like how they said he is now living in a plant museum. I thought that was funny. So, him and Store,
we're still not sure exactly what Store is.
I guess he was just a guy, and now they have this whole thing about rehabilitation in Africa, because I guess there's no glaciers in Africa, or that's just where they are.
Well, yeah, because Africa being right on the equator, that would be one of the last places where the glaciers haven't touched yet. Yeah.
So they have rehabilitation in Africa, but because they say it like that, it's like, okay, so are people like, is this some sort of, well, we've got to, correct what you're thinking, so that you can go out and do that stuff. And it's like, okay.
That is something that was being done, especially in China during this time, in communist China. I don't know that the Russians were doing re-education. They might still have been doing it by this time, but yeah, that is a thing. It would go right up. That's what they were doing in Cambodia in the killing fields. Anybody who was not killed for being against the regime was then sent to literally re-education camps.
Yeah,
where they were basically brainwashed.
Now it could be that it's more of maybe not re-education, but just finding a new life in Africa away from the glaciers and stuff. But the way they always said, it's rehabilitation in Africa, it's like, oh, what exactly does that mean? And then that would kind of make sense for this guy kind of going rogue, and it seems like he's kind of going back to more hunter-gatherer sort of things, and trying to stay away. He's basically trying to stay away from everyone. So he's staying away from all the scientists because they could potentially send him to rehabilitation. So because otherwise, just like if they're offering you, food and warmth and shelter in Africa, you might as well take it instead of living in a plant museum. Of course, then you could also say, even if that is what they offer, it is the artificial food that they have. So maybe he's more, maybe he is a bit more old school, kind of like what we were sort of theorizing with Penley. It's like, well, maybe he is more old school, which is why he would want to stay there, so that he could actually grow, fruits and vegetables to eat. So,
by the way, a weird little footnote here. Here in Oklahoma City, we actually have the Myriad Gardens that has the Crystal Bridge Botanical. Can't remember what the thing, but anyway, we have a massive Amazon rainforest type environment that is contained in this gigantic glass tube that's like the size of a football field. Now, why? I have no idea, but it's been here. We've had it for at least since the late 80s or early 90s. And of course there's the seed vault that they're storing away seeds from literally every plant on the planet, and it's somewhere in Scandinavia, if I recall correctly. The idea being that if there is some kind of natural disaster around the world that starts killing off crops, we'll have the basic seeds to start regrowing natural crops after the disaster passes.
Yeah. It is one of those interesting things to just just a natural disaster, and more than just, disaster movies and stuff like that. But the idea of like, okay, the world as you know it is kind of gone. Now, how do you rebuild from that with what you have? Like, okay, yeah, you're trying to rebuild your world, but what sort of world does that create, you know? So, I mean, right now in this episode, obviously we have the actual disaster itself, but it would be interesting to actually get more of the, I guess, reconstruction of that, you know? What happens after 2012, the movie? I don't know.
Yeah.
So, wasn't it in... Because I don't really remember that movie, 2012. Like, wasn't it at the end, it's like, well, luckily, while the rest of the world was destroyed, Africa just kind of went up, so it's good.
Yeah.
So...
it's again, you have to live on what habitable land that there is left.
Yeah.
I've always theorized that one of the reasons we had the Ice Age, and I can't remember if the Doctor mentioned this, is that there might have been, he says something about the reversal of the magnetic field, but what if, for example, the Earth were to tilt on its axis 1 or 2 degrees more than it is now, right? Because now it's like 23.5 degrees that's tilted. Which gives us, our spring in March, April, and May, and then summer. But if that were to tilt even 1 degree further, that means that our northern hemisphere would undergo a much colder winter and a much colder spring and a much colder fall and even a cooler summertime. So that seems to be something that seems to be happening here. And they noted, I haven't heard them talk about the South Pole. This seems to be, although they did say Australasia at one point. So that would be Southern Hemisphere. Yeah. But it does seem to be primarily confined to the Northern Hemisphere, but then again, that's where most of the land is. So
well, and it's also interesting because they mentioned rehabilitation in Africa, but by that same logic, you could also do that in South America.
Yes.
So South America should be pretty good, honestly. So...
but maybe we're getting too nitpicky.
Maybe. I mean, you don't have to specify both of them, but yeah, I mean, it does seem to be more of a focus on the Northern Hemisphere. And, when you mention, like, oh, well, if it rotated just 1 more degree, we'd have, like, cooler summers and stuff. It's like, I'm kind of tempted on that.
Okay, but having summers that only reached into the, 70s and 80s would also mean that we would have every winter like this one that we just had 2 weeks ago, where the temperatures go down not only below freezing, but below zero, and stay that way for weeks and months at a time.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate part, which, I mean, we were all right, and, and there were other people in Oklahoma where, it was a little worse than us, and obviously, the place I think the most hit was Texas, so... Clearly, they would not be ready for that, so they would have to really, hunker down and try to sort some things out before any sort of thing like that happened.
I may have mentioned this before, too. In the 3 years that we lived in England, the highest recorded temperature in Mildenhall, when we were there, was, I think, like 80 or 81 degrees in the summertime. But, again, coldest winters that I've ever lived through, except for when I lived in Nebraska. And Nebraska and southern England are roughly the same latitude north of the equator, so it's pretty cold there.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like, well, winters would be even worse, but if it's not 100 degrees in the summer, that would be really nice.
Yeah,
because I'm waiting for it. I'm like, I know it's gonna come back one of these days. I'm gonna wake up, it's gonna be so hot, I have to turn on every fan. And actually, right now, for my Mr. Robot reactions, I don't have anything on the table, but the main character always wears a hoodie. So I always wear my hoodie in every episode. And I knew immediately this is going to get very difficult in the summer. I'm going to be burning up when we get there. So, anywho, Ice Warriors, they're just there in the middle of all this, which is interesting.
Yeah, they're somewhat of a just an afterthought to this whole thing so far. Now, they're obviously, now that they have excavated their ship and they're going to make the decision whether to try to conquer the Earth or go back to Mars, that will obviously play in the last 3 episodes. But so far, they're really just kind of off in the background.
Yeah, it almost feels like this guy came up with the plot, and then whatever script editor was like, okay, this is great. Can you put in an alien? And he was like, I mean, I can. If you really want me to, I can. So that's how we get the Ice Wars. And at the very least, they're done well in this one. So, and they're very interesting. Like, okay, so here's this guy who was in the ice, and now he's getting more of them. And it is sort of turning into... I mean, it's a bit like Tomb of the Cybermen of like, oh, we have to awaken these things. But it makes a bit more sense. They accidentally brought this guy back to life, and now he's doing that to the rest of his crew and stuff.
Yeah.
And there's still the possibility that they won't conquer Earth. I wonder if they would actually go there. Like, oh, they're not actually evil or anything. They thought about it, but they were like, well, you've got your problems. I think we should just work on Mars for right now.
And also, at the moment, there's only, 4 or 5 of them?
Yeah,
so
there's not many of them.
Yeah, so 4 or 5 guys, and they do have the sonic disruptor, the what is it, the Klingon or Romulan sonic disruptor type thing.
Yeah,
and although they do share some also characteristics of the Gorn from Star Trek about this time. Not to say that one didn't steal from the other, but but still. So yeah, it strikes me that if they have been in the ice for several thousand years, they will come to the realization that they would not be able to conquer the entire planet. They might be able to take over this base, and hopefully send word back to Mars. But what has happened in the last 5,000 years on Mars? Has that civilization gone extinct? Most civilizations don't last that long, even with technology. So
yeah. I did also think, maybe the Ice Warriors caused the glaciers to expand. Like, maybe they did it, but with the explanation they gave, it doesn't really seem like that. So, again, it really just seems like the Ice Warriors are just an extra thing that's also happening. Yeah. I have this, I've got this whole story about, glaciers expanding, and how do we deal with that? And the script editor was like, glaciers? What if they found someone in a glacier? It's like, okay, I can put that in. But make it an alien. Okay, I can do that. And then they wrote that in, and it's like, I guess that works. Yeah. So,
and of course, this is at least a good 20 years before they found the Iceman of the Alps.
Yeah.
Who was a guy that was up there for at least 5,000 years, frozen in the ice. And we're learning so much from him. So, there's just kind of an interesting archaeological aspect to this whole thing.
Yeah, you could also say, because that's actually, after this episode, maybe they were also thinking of Pompeii, maybe. Yeah. So it's like, oh yeah, well, you find people in Pompeii, so maybe, you find someone trapped in the ice. So, of course, with all the, the glaciers came in, but the glaciers weren't always there. So, I guess that also brings up the question of where are we in this episode? So clearly this was already a place that was snowy, and this avalanche was there during the first ice age, but then never melted, so they were there for thousands of years until now we're in a second ice age, and this time we found them and thawed them out. So
this, again, if it's in Europe, it's got to be either in the Alps or the Caucasus. Again, since there are no Russians, probably not anywhere in Siberia. I don't know if the Urals are high enough to be that cold year-round. So, yeah, this is kind of an odd little situation. Where exactly are we?
Yeah. Where are we and what year is it? 2 distinct questions that we just haven't asked in 3 episodes. Yeah. So.
All right, what else we got here?
We kind of touched on everything else of, Clint's problem with experts and stuff like that, which was pretty interesting. And
Clint is a very stable genius.
Yeah. It's, it is interesting. He's got his goals. He's going for it, and the scientists, they're just not. Yeah, they're just not helping, But he still needs them. So it's, I don't know.
I probably know as much as my experts.
Trying
not to get too political here.
Nah. And then the last thing I wrote down is computers, which it's not just a straight, we don't like that technology thing. It is more you understand it all. It's like, okay, Penley really has a problem with Clint's overuse of computers and how he always relies on it rather than relying on the actual expert he brought in. And the doctor's just offended that they would double check his work. So
now, one last comment on the computer thing. To allow computers to make decisions that humans have made up till this point. That's the premise behind a wonderful film, one of the few Stanley Kubrick films that I actually like, Dr. Strangelove. Where you build a device that is set to explode under a certain set of circumstances and can't be overridden by humans. Well, that's obviously a doomsday device. That's going to end up blowing up the world because the computer won't be able to say, this is not acceptable. It's also the premise, if you remember, of that great 80s film War Games, where they hold the simulated nuclear attack, and the two guys in the bunker there in Nebraska, one guy says, "We haven't followed the proper procedures. I can't fire off American missiles until I know for sure." And the other guy says, "You're not following procedure, and I'm going to shoot you if you don't do it." So that they just take them all out and replace them with the machine, the war operation, something they call it the Whopper. And then the Whopper gets hacked into accidentally and starts playing global thermonuclear war with a kid from California or Colorado, wherever he was. I can't remember. Seattle.
It kind of reminds me of in The Day of the Doctor, where it's like, okay, we have the moment that is this huge doomsday device, but we made it so incredibly powerful that it develops sentience, and now we can't use it because it judges us, you know?
Yeah.
It is one of those things like, you know, it's like, oh, well, we've created this doomsday machine and we can't override the protocol, so if humanity reaches that point, we're done because the machine will destroy us. I do like that that's the opposite, where it's like, no, it knows why you're here. It's trying to get you not to do it. So, and which was the whole point of that episode, was the moment trying to save the Doctor, basically. So, yeah, all interesting stuff. But that's all I wrote down on this one.
I got nothing else.
Yeah,
I would be interested at some point to look at some of the other DVD features here.
Yeah, so it's really nice. I did think, you know, because obviously they have a ton of these, but I know that there are some like season collections. Like I think there was a Blu-ray, whereas like all of the 7th season or something, and I was interested. I was like, well, maybe that could be interesting, because here's the thing. This is like $22. This is one story. We're using this for 2 weeks, just because it is a 6-parter. I can't realistically buy all those.
Yeah.
Like, that's a little too much. So maybe if I could find some sort of a collection of those, maybe we could do that. And obviously it's nice having subtitles as well.
Yeah.
So yeah. But at the very least, we have this, and it is nice. So, yeah. That's basically it. And that's just 3 episodes.
Yeah.
We've still got 3 more to go through, and hopefully they keep up with this.
Yeah. One of their better stories.
Yeah, definitely. So, that is basically it. With all that being said, we're Alex and Dad from 7th Hour Films, and we will see you guys next time. Take care. Alright guys, thanks for watching this video. If you want to watch more of our Doctor Who classic reactions, you can click on the playlist, you can subscribe if you haven't done that already, and be sure to hit the notification bell. You can support me on Patreon and follow me on social media, links below in the description. See you guys later.